Sarah Mitchell found Running Bear bleeding to death in the canyon, 3 bullets in his chest and vultures already circling overhead. Saving the Apache chief would make her a traitor to every settler in Arizona territory, but watching him die would make her something worse. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The sun blazed mercilessly over the canyon walls, turning the air into shimmering waves of heat. Sarah Mitchell, barely 10 years old, with sun-bleached braids and freckles scattered across her nose, climbed the rocky hillside with the determined stride of a child who knew these lands better than most adults. Her worn brown boots kicked up dust with each step, and her cotton dress, faded from countless washings, clung to her small frame in the oppressive heat. She wasn't supposed to be this far from the ranch. Her father, Thomas Mitchell, had warned her a dozen times about wandering beyond the boundary markers, but Sarah had spotted a hawk circling overhead that morning, and something in its flight pattern told her it had found prey, or perhaps something more. The hawk's shadow passed over her again, and that's when she saw him. At first, Sarah thought it was just a pile of earth-colored fabric caught on the rocks near the ravine, but as she drew closer, her heart seized in her chest. It was a man, and he wasn't moving. Blood had soaked into the dry earth around him, creating dark patterns in the dust. His breathing was shallow, almost imperceptible. He wore deerskin clothing decorated with intricate beadwork, and his long black hair, streaked with silver, was matted with blood. Even unconscious, there was something noble about his weathered face, something that spoke of strength and wisdom earned through countless sunrises. Sarah knew immediately what he was. Apache. The word itself made grown men reach for their rifles back at the ranch. The tensions between the settlers and the Apache tribes had been simmering for years, occasionally boiling over into violence that left scars on both sides. Her mind raced. She should run back to the ranch. She should tell her father, but by the time she made it there and returned with help, this man would be dead. The son would see to that if the blood loss didn't claim him first. "Mister," Sarah whispered, kneeling beside him with trembling hands. "Can you hear me?" No response. Only the harsh whisper of his labored breathing. She could see the wounds now, bullet holes, at least 3 of them, clustered around his shoulder and chest. Outlaws, she thought. The hills were crawling with them lately, men who killed for gold, for horses, for the simple pleasure of violence. Sarah looked around frantically. About 50 yards away, she could see a cluster of cottonwood trees near a small spring she'd discovered weeks ago. If she could get him there, at least there would be water, shade a chance. But how? He was easily twice her size, a grown man built like the mountains themselves. She tried to pull him by his arms, but he was impossibly heavy. Sarah felt tears of frustration prick her eyes. She couldn't just leave him here to die. Her mother, God rest her soul, had always told her that compassion wasn't about what was easy or convenient. It was about what was right. "Please don't die," Sarah pleaded, even though she knew he couldn't hear her. "I'm going to help you. I promise." She removed her sunbonnet and dipped it in the small trickle of water running between the rocks, then pressed the wet fabric to his lips. A drop of moisture touched his tongue, and she saw his throat move slightly, swallowing by pure instinct. That small movement gave her hope. Sarah surveyed the landscape again with new eyes. Maybe she couldn't carry him, but perhaps she could drag him. She grabbed a fallen branch, stripped it of its smaller twigs, and positioned it under his shoulders. Using all her strength, she began pulling, inch by painful inch, toward the cottonwood trees. The sun climbed higher. Sweat poured down her face. Her hands blistered and bled from gripping the rough wood. But Sarah Mitchell didn't stop. She had made a promise, and she intended to keep it. By the time Sarah reached the cottonwood trees, her small hands were raw and bleeding. The sun had climbed to its zenith, turning the canyon into a furnace. She collapsed beside the unconscious man, gasping for breath, every muscle in her body screaming in protest. But she had done it. She had moved him almost 50 yards to the shade. The spring bubbled softly nearby, a sound that seemed impossibly peaceful given the circumstances. Sarah cupped her hands and drank deeply, the cool water washing away the copper taste of exertion from her mouth. Then she turned her attention back to the wounded man. His breathing had grown more labored. The blood from his wounds had slowed to a trickle, but Sarah knew enough from helping birth calves and tending injured animals on the ranch that blood loss could kill just as surely as the bullet itself. She needed to stop the bleeding completely. Sarah tore strips from her petticoat, the white cotton fabric already stained with dirt and blood. Her fingers shook as she pressed the makeshift bandages against his wounds. She'd seen her father dress injuries before, though never anything this serious. "I'm sorry if this hurts," she whispered, even though he couldn't hear her. As she worked, Sarah studied his face more closely. Deep lines creased his weathered skin, speaking of years spent under the open sky. A scar ran from his temple to his jawline, old and faded. His lips were cracked from dehydration, and his breathing whistled slightly through his nose. Who was this man? Did he have a family waiting for him somewhere? Children who would wonder why their father never came home. Sarah soaked another piece of cloth in the spring water and pressed it gently to his forehead. As the cool moisture touched his skin, his eyes flickered open just briefly. They were dark as obsidian, unfocused, and clouded with pain. "Shh," Sarah said softly, placing a small hand on his shoulder. "You're safe. I'm helping you." He tried to speak, but only a rattling sound emerged. His eyes closed again, and Sarah felt panic rise in her chest. Was he dying right in front of her? "No, no, no," she pleaded. "Stay with me. Please stay with me." She remembered something her mother used to do when Sarah was sick with fever: humming. Her mother would hum old songs while placing cool cloths on her forehead, and somehow that always made Sarah feel better. So Sarah hummed. It was an old lullaby her mother had sung, one that spoke of mountains and rivers and the comfort of home. Her voice was thin and wavering in the vast wilderness, but she kept humming as she tended his wounds, as she dripped water between his cracked lips, as she watched the sun begin its slow descent toward the western horizon. Hours passed. The shadows grew longer, painting the canyon walls in shades of amber and gold. Sarah's stomach growled with hunger, and she knew her father would be looking for her by now. He would be furious that she disobeyed, terrified that something had happened to her. But she couldn't leave. Not yet. Not until she knew this man would survive. As twilight approached, painting the sky in shades of purple and rose, the man stirred again. This time his eyes opened fully and focused on Sarah's face. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. A 10-year-old settler girl and an Apache chief, two beings from worlds that were supposed to be enemies. Sarah saw recognition dawn in his eyes. He knew what she was, just as she knew what he was. His hand moved slowly, painfully, toward the knife at his belt. Sarah didn't move. She didn't run. She just looked at him with those earnest blue eyes and said quietly, "I'm not going to hurt you. I promise." His hand stopped. Something shifted in his expression, a subtle softening that Sarah couldn't quite name. He tried to speak again, and this time words emerged, rough and halting. "Why?" he rasped in heavily accented English. "Why help enemy?" Sarah thought about this for a moment, tilting her head slightly the way she did when considering something important. "My mama used to say that we're all just people trying to find our way home," she answered simply. "I reckon that means nobody should die alone in the dirt when someone could have helped." The man's eyes glistened with something that might have been tears or simply the reflection of the fading light. He closed them again, but Sarah noticed his hand had moved away from his knife. Darkness fell over the canyon like a blanket, bringing with it a chill that made Sarah shiver in her thin cotton dress. The temperature in the desert dropped dramatically at night, and without a fire or proper shelter, she knew they were both in danger. But lighting a fire was out of the question. The smoke would be visible for miles, and Sarah didn't know if the men who had shot the Apache were still searching for him. For all she knew, they could be camped just over the next ridge, waiting for dawn to finish what they'd started. She huddled closer to the wounded man, drawing what little warmth she could from his body. He was burning with fever now, his skin hot to the touch, despite the cool night air. Sarah dipped the cloth in the spring water again and again, trying to bring down the temperature that threatened to consume him. "Talk to me," she whispered, partly to keep him conscious and partly to stave off her own fear of the darkness. "What's your name?" "I'm Sarah. Sarah Mitchell." The man's eyes opened slowly, glazed with fever but aware. He studied her face in the moonlight that filtered through the cottonwood leaves. "Running Bear," he said, each word seeming to cost him great effort. "I am Running Bear." "Running Bear," Sarah repeated softly. "That's a beautiful name. Do you have family, Mr. Running Bear? People who will be looking for you?" A shadow of pain crossed his face, and Sarah couldn't tell if it was from his wounds or from something deeper. "Wife, gone, long time gone," he managed. "Daughter. White men take her. 10 summers ago. Never see again." Sarah's heart clenched. She was roughly the same age his daughter would have been when she was taken. No wonder he had looked at her with such complex emotion when he first regained consciousness. "I'm so sorry," she said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. That's awful. I lost my mama too, 2 years ago. Fever took her." Running Bear's fevered eyes focused on her with surprising clarity. In that moment, Sarah understood something profound. They were both orphans in their own way, both marked by loss, both trying to survive in a world that seemed determined to take away everyone they loved. "You brave," Running Bear whispered. "Like daughter. She have fire in heart." "She sounds wonderful," Sarah said, adjusting the cloth on his forehead. "What was her name?" "Morning Sky. She loved flowers. Always picking flowers." Sarah smiled sadly. "I love flowers too. There's a patch of desert marigolds near our ranch that bloom every spring. They're my favorite." Running Bear tried to smile, but it turned into a grimace of pain. His hand moved to his chest, pressing against the bandages Sarah had fashioned. They were already soaked through with blood again. "You need real medicine," Sarah said, worry creeping into her voice. "The kind we have back at the ranch. My pa has whiskey for cleaning wounds and proper bandages and—" "No," Running Bear interrupted, his voice suddenly strong despite his condition. "Cannot go to white settlement. They will kill Running Bear. My pa wouldn't—" "Yes," Running Bear insisted, his dark eyes boring into hers. "He would. All white men would. Running Bear is chief, leader of his people. White men want Running Bear dead many years now." Sarah felt her world tilt slightly. A chief. She had saved an Apache chief. If her father knew, if anyone at the ranch knew, there would be consequences beyond her imagination. The army had standing orders to capture or kill Apache leaders. The bounty on their heads could feed a family for a year. But looking at this man shivering with fever, bleeding through his bandages, all Sarah could see was someone who needed help, someone who had lost a daughter, someone who was simply trying to survive. "Then I'll bring the medicine here," she said with determination. "I'll sneak it out tonight. My pa sleeps heavy after his evening whiskey. I can take what we need and be back before dawn." "Too dangerous," Running Bear protested weakly. "For you, if caught." "I won't get caught," Sarah interrupted with the confidence of youth. "I know every inch of those hills between here and home. I can make it." Running Bear studied her for a long moment, Then, slowly, he reached up and removed a leather cord from around his neck. Hanging from it was a small stone, polished smooth and carved with symbols Sarah didn't recognize. "Take," he said, pressing it into her small hand. "Protection from my people. If you meet Apache in dark, show this. They will know. You friend of Running Bear." Sarah closed her fingers around the stone. It was still warm from his body heat. "I'll be back," she promised. "Just hold on. Please hold on, please." The journey back to the ranch felt longer in the darkness. Sarah moved through the canyon with practiced stealth, her small feet finding purchase on rocks she knew by heart. The moon was her only companion, casting silver shadows across the landscape that transformed familiar territory into something alien and ominous. Every sound made her freeze: the rustle of a desert mouse, the distant howl of a coyote, the whisper of wind through the sage. Any of those sounds could be masking the approach of the outlaws who had shot Running Bear, or worse, a search party from the ranch looking for her. She clutched the stone talisman Running Bear had given her, drawing courage from its smooth warmth. Somewhere behind her he was fighting for his life. She couldn't fail him. As Sarah crested the final hill overlooking the Mitchell Ranch, she saw the lanterns still burning in the main house. Her heart sank. Her father was still awake, probably pacing the floor with worry, rifle in hand, ready to shoot first and ask questions later to anyone who might have taken his daughter. She could see his silhouette moving past the window, back and forth, back and forth. Even from this distance, Sarah could read the anxiety in his movements. "I'm sorry, Pa," she whispered to the night, "but I can't let someone die." "Not when I can help." Sarah circled wide, approaching the ranch from the eastern side, where the supply shed stood, separate from the main house. Her father kept the medical supplies there, along with tools and provisions. If she was careful, if she was quiet, she could slip in and out without him noticing. The shed door creaked slightly as she eased it open, and Sarah's heart nearly stopped. She froze, counting her heartbeats, waiting to see if the sound had carried to the house. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Nothing. No shout, no footsteps, just the continued pacing of her father's shadow across the window. Inside the shed, Sarah worked by feel more than sight. Her hands found the medical kit her father kept for emergencies. Bandages, needle and thread, a bottle of whiskey for cleaning wounds, laudanum for pain. She stuffed everything into a burlap sack, moving with the efficiency of desperation. Then her hand landed on something else. The revolver her father kept in the shed for killing rattlesnakes and putting down suffering animals. Sarah had fired it before, under her father's supervision. She knew how to load it, how to aim it, how to squeeze the trigger without jerking. She hesitated. Taking medical supplies was one thing. Taking a weapon was something else entirely. But the memory of Running Bear's fevered eyes, of his daughter lost 10 years ago, of his wounds seeping blood through makeshift bandages, made the decision for her. If those outlaws came back, or if some other danger threatened them, she wanted to be able to protect the man who had already lost so much. Sarah added the revolver to her sack, along with a box of ammunition. She was turning to leave when a voice froze her in place. Sarah Ann Mitchell. Her father stood in the doorway, lantern in one hand, rifle in the other. His face was a storm of emotions: relief, anger, fear, confusion. "Pa," Sarah breathed, her mind racing for an explanation, for anything that might let her finish what she'd started. Thomas Mitchell stepped into the shed, his weathered face illuminated by the flickering lantern light. He was a tall man, hardened by years of ranching in unforgiving territory, but his eyes were gentle when they landed on his daughter. "Do you have any idea what I've been through?" he said, his voice rough with contained emotion. thinking you were taken by outlaws or Apaches or worse? I've had men out searching for you since sundown. I'm sorry, Pa. I didn't mean to worry you. Where have you been? He looked at the sack in her hands, at the bulge where the revolver rested. And what are you doing with my medical supplies and my gun? Sarah met his eyes. In that moment, she could have lied. She could have invented some story about being lost, about planning to run away, about anything other than the truth. But her mother had always said that lies were heavier to carry than any truth, no matter how difficult. There's a man hurt in the canyon, she said quietly, shot by outlaws. He's dying, Pa. If I don't get these supplies back to him, he won't make it through the night. Her father's expression darkened. A man? What kind of man? Sarah's silence was answer enough. Apache, Thomas said, and it wasn't a question. His hand tightened on the rifle. You found an Apache. I found a person who needed help, Sarah corrected, lifting her chin with defiance that surprised even herself. And I'm going back to help him, with or without your permission. The silence in the shed stretched like a rope pulled too tight, ready to snap at any moment. Thomas Mitchell stared at his daughter, this small, stubborn girl who somehow carried her mother's spirit in every defiant tilt of her chin. Sarah, he said slowly, carefully, as if speaking to a spooked horse. You don't understand what you're dealing with. The Apache aren't like us. They've raided settlements, killed families. So have white men, Sarah interrupted, her voice quiet but firm. Running Bear told me about his daughter. White men took her 10 years ago. He never saw her again. She was my age, Pa. Thomas flinched as if she'd struck him. His jaw worked silently, and Sarah watched emotions war across his weathered face. Running Bear, he repeated hoarsely. You're telling me you found Running Bear, the chief the army's been hunting for 5 years? Sarah nodded, clutching the sack tighter against her chest. Dear God, child, Thomas breathed, setting down the lantern with a trembling hand. Do you know what they'd do to you if they found out? What they'd do to me for harboring information about his whereabouts? Then don't tell them, Sarah said simply. Nobody has to know but us. I should march you back there right now and put a bullet in him myself, Thomas said, but there was no conviction in his words. It's what any reasonable man would do. It's what's expected. Is that what Mama would have wanted? The question hung in the air like smoke. Thomas closed his eyes, and Sarah saw his shoulders sag slightly. That's not fair, he whispered. Mama used to say that when we stop seeing people as people, we lose the best parts of ourselves, Sarah continued, her voice thick with emotion. She said that every life matters to someone, somewhere. Running Bear matters to his people, Pa, just like you matter to me. Thomas opened his eyes, and Sarah was shocked to see them glistening with unshed tears. Your mother, he said roughly, would have done exactly what you're doing. And it would have terrified me just as much as this does. He set the rifle down against the wall and rubbed his face with both hands. Show me, he said finally. Sarah's eyes widened. What? Show me where he is. If I'm going to let my daughter risk her life for an Apache chief, I'm sure as hell not letting her do it alone. The journey back through the canyon was different with her father beside her. Thomas moved with the quiet competence of a man who knew the land, his presence both comforting and somehow making everything more real. This wasn't just Sarah's secret adventure anymore. This was a decision that could destroy their family if anyone found out. They didn't speak during the trek. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been said. But as they walked, Sarah noticed her father checking behind them frequently, his hand never far from the revolver at his hip. When they finally reached the cottonwood trees, the moon had risen higher, painting everything in shades of silver and shadow. Running Bear lay exactly where Sarah had left him, but even from a distance, she could tell something had changed. He was sitting up, his back against the tree trunk, and his hand gripped a makeshift spear fashioned from a broken branch. His eyes, fever-bright and dangerous, tracked their approach with the wariness of a wounded wolf. "Running Bear," Sarah called softly, stepping ahead of her father. "It's me." "Sarah, I brought help." But Running Bear's attention was locked on Thomas. The two men stared at each other across the small clearing, and Sarah felt the weight of centuries of conflict hanging between them. "Thomas Mitchell," her father said, his voice neutral. He made no move toward his weapon. "I own the ranch to the east. This is my daughter. You saved yourself from dying alone thanks to..." Running Bear's grip on his makeshift spear didn't loosen. "Why you here?" "Because apparently my daughter inherited her mother's stubborn compassion," Thomas replied. "And because I learned a long time ago that when Sarah Mitchell makes up her mind about something, trying to stop her is like trying to hold back a flash flood with your bare hands." The standoff lasted only seconds, but to Sarah it felt like hours. Finally, Running Bear lowered his makeshift spear slightly, though his body remained tense, ready to spring into action despite his wounds. "I have medical supplies," Thomas said, gesturing to the sack Sarah carried. "Real bandages, whiskey to clean the wounds, something for the pain. My daughter tells me you've been shot 3 times and you're still breathing. That's either remarkable luck or remarkable stubbornness." Both," Running Bear rasped, and something that might have been humor flickered across his fevered face. Thomas nodded. "Well, stubbornness I understand. May I approach?" Running Bear glanced at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. After a long moment, the Apache chief inclined his head. Thomas moved forward slowly, deliberately, keeping his hands visible. He knelt beside Running Bear and began unpacking the medical supplies with practiced efficiency. Sarah watched as her father's weathered hands that had built their ranch from nothing and buried her mother in the hard desert soil, began carefully peeling away the blood-soaked makeshift bandages she had applied. "This is going to hurt," Thomas warned. "The wounds need to be cleaned properly, and at least one of these bullets is still inside you." "Do what must be done," Running Bear said, his jaw set. Thomas uncorked the whiskey bottle and met Running Bear's eyes. "I've done this before, but never on a man who might kill me once he's healed." "I will not kill man who saves Running Bear's life," the chief replied. "This is sacred oath. Fair enough?" Thomas poured the whiskey over the wounds. Running Bear's body went rigid, every muscle straining against the agony, but he didn't cry out. The only sound was his harsh breathing through clenched teeth. Sarah moved closer and took his hand without thinking. His grip was crushing, but she held on, her small fingers intertwined with his calloused ones. "Tell me about your daughter," Thomas said as he worked, his voice deliberately conversational. Sarah mentioned her name was Morning Sky. Running Bear's eyes, glazed with pain, focused on something far away. "She have 8 summers, loved to laugh, always singing. One day she go to river with other children. White soldiers come, take children, use as hostages." His voice broke slightly. "We give them horses, furs, everything they ask. They promise return children. They lie." Thomas's hands paused momentarily in their work. "I'm sorry," he said, and there was genuine anguish in his voice. "I'm truly sorry. No father should lose a child that way." "You have pain too," Running Bear observed, watching Thomas's face. "I see in eyes. Same pain." "My wife," Thomas admitted quietly, threading a needle with surgical thread. "Fever took her 2 years ago. I tried everything, every medicine, every prayer. Nothing worked. Sarah was only 8 years old when she watched her mother die. Same age your daughter was when she was taken." The two men looked at each other, and Sarah saw something shift between them. Not friendship exactly, but recognition. Two fathers who had lost the women they loved, trying to navigate a world that seemed determined to take everything. "This will be the worst part," Thomas said, gesturing to the bullet still lodged in Running Bear's shoulder. "I need to dig it out. Sarah, get behind him and brace his back. Keep him as still as possible." Sarah moved quickly, pressing her small frame against Running Bear's back. She could feel the fever radiating from his skin, feel every tremor that ran through his powerful frame. Thomas worked with the knife, his face set in concentration. Running Bear's body convulsed with agony, but Sarah held on, whispering the same lullaby she'd hummed earlier. Her voice was the only soft thing in that moment of brutality. Finally, with a sickening sound, Thomas extracted the bullet and dropped it onto a rock. "Got it," he breathed. "Now, to clean and stitch." The eastern sky was beginning to lighten with the first hint of dawn when Thomas finally tied off the last stitch. Running Bear had endured the entire ordeal with a stoicism that earned even Thomas's grudging respect. Sweat poured down the Apache chief's face and his breathing was ragged, but he was alive and properly bandaged. "The fever should break by tomorrow if infection doesn't set in," Thomas said, wiping his bloody hands on a cloth. "You'll need to rest here for at least 3 days before you can travel." "Maybe more." "Cannot stay long," Running Bear managed through cracked lips. "My people, they search for me. If find me with white man, they'll assume you've been captured," Thomas finished grimly. "I understand, but you move now, you'll die. Simple as that." Sarah had fetched fresh water from the spring and now held a cup to Running Bear's lips. He drank gratefully, his dark eyes never leaving her face. "You have spirit of warrior," he told her softly. "Not many children, not many men would do what you do today." "My mama always said courage isn't about not being scared," Sarah replied. "It's about doing what's right, even when you are scared." "Your mother was wise, woman." "She was," Thomas agreed quietly, and for a moment the three of them sat in companionable silence as the desert began to wake around them. Then Sarah heard it, a sound that made her blood turn to ice, the distinctive rattle that gave the creature its name. "Don't move," Thomas whispered, his hand slowly reaching for his revolver. The rattlesnake emerged from behind a nearby rock, its thick body coiling and uncoiling as it moved across the sand. It was massive, easily 5 feet long, with diamond patterns along its back that gleamed in the dawn light, and it was heading straight toward Running Bear, who lay vulnerable and unable to move quickly. The snake stopped about 6 feet away, its head raised, tongue flicking out to taste the air. Sarah could see its tail vibrating, hear the menacing buzz that signaled it was ready to strike. "My gun," Thomas breathed. "Sarah, get behind me, slowly." But Sarah's mind was racing. She'd spent her whole life in these canyons, had learned their ways and their dangers. She knew that any sudden movement, any sound, might trigger the snake to attack. And in Running Bear's weakened state, a rattlesnake bite would likely kill him. The snake's attention was fixed on the wounded man, drawn perhaps by the scent of blood or the heat of his fever. It coiled tighter, preparing to strike. In that instant, Sarah made a decision. She grabbed a fallen cottonwood branch beside her, dry, thick, about 4 feet long. Before her father could stop her, she jumped up onto a large rock that jutted out near the snake's position, drawing herself up to her full height. "Hey!" she shouted, waving the branch. "Over here! Look at me!" "Sarah, no!" Thomas roared, but it was too late. The snake's head swiveled toward this new threat. Its dark eyes locked onto Sarah, and its body shifted direction. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest, but she kept her voice loud and her movements deliberate. "That's right, come to me. Leave him alone." The snake began moving toward her rock, its movements deliberate and terrifyingly graceful. Sarah could see every scale, every muscle rippling beneath its skin. She was acutely aware that one mistake, one slip, and she would fall right into its striking range. "Sarah, stay still," her father commanded, his revolver now aimed at the snake. "I've got a clear shot." "No!" Running Bear's voice cut through the tension, urgent despite his weakness. "Gunshot, bring men! Outlaws still near! Hear gunshot, they come!" Thomas hesitated, the gun wavering. He was caught between saving his daughter and potentially bringing death to all of them. The snake coiled at the base of Sarah's rock, rattling furiously now. It was preparing to strike, but Sarah had bought them precious seconds. Time seemed to slow as Sarah stood on that rock, the massive rattlesnake coiled below her, its body tensed like a spring ready to release. Her hands gripped the cottonwood branch so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but there was nowhere to go. "Sarah, listen to me." Running Bear's voice cut through her fear, surprisingly steady despite his wounds. "Not move quick. Snake see movement, snake strike. Move slow like wind through grass." "What do I do?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The branch in your hand," Running Bear continued, his fevered eyes locked on the snake. "When I say you push branch down between you and snake, not hit snake, guide it, show it different path." Thomas still held his revolver, every muscle in his body coiled as tight as the snake itself. "Running Bear, if this goes wrong, trust," Running Bear said simply. "Trust like your daughter trust when she saved Running Bear's life." The snake's rattle increased in intensity, its head drawing back another inch. Sarah could see its mouth begin to open, revealing curved fangs that glistened with venom. "Now," Running Bear commanded. "Slow, gentle, like you touch baby bird." Sarah lowered the branch with agonizing slowness, placing it between herself and the snake. The serpent's head tracked the movement, its tongue flickering out rapidly, trying to assess this new element in its environment. "Good," Running Bear murmured, and despite his pain there was pride in his voice. "Now move branch toward left. Slow. Show snake there is better way, safer way, away from heat, away from blood smell." Sarah did as instructed, her entire body trembling with the effort of moving so deliberately when every fiber of her being wanted to flee. The branch moved left, drawing a line in the sand. The snake followed the movement, its head swaying slightly. For a heart-stopping moment, Sarah thought it might strike anyway. But then Running Bear began to hum, a low, rhythmic sound that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. It was a song, Sarah realized, an old Apache song that rose and fell like breathing, like heartbeats, like the natural rhythm of the desert itself. The snake's rattle began to slow. Its body, though still coiled, seemed to relax slightly. It was as if the song reminded it that there were easier prey than a little girl on a rock, easier battles than this confrontation. "Keep moving, branch," Running Bear instructed between verses of his song. "Guide snake to rocks, to cool shadows. Snake want cool place. Give snake what it want." Sarah continued the slow, gentle motion, her arms aching from holding the branch so steady. The snake began to move, following the path she was creating, drawn toward the shaded rocks near the spring. Thomas watched in amazement as his daughter, guided by an Apache chief's ancient knowledge, accomplished what seemed impossible. The snake uncoiled fully, stretching its impressive length as it glided away from them, toward the cool rocks and shadows that offered shelter from the rising sun. Finally, the snake disappeared into a crevice between two large boulders, its rattle fading to silence. Sarah collapsed onto the rock, her legs suddenly unable to support her. Thomas rushed forward and lifted her down, crushing her against his chest. "Don't you ever," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "ever do something like that again without talking to me first." "It worked, though," Sarah pointed out, her voice muffled against his shirt. "That it did," Thomas admitted, setting her down but keeping his hands on her shoulders. He looked over at Running Bear, who had fallen back against the tree trunk, exhausted from the effort of guiding Sarah through the ordeal. "How did you know?" Thomas asked. "How did you know the song would work? Snake is part of desert like Running Bear," the Apache chief replied, his breathing labored. All things in desert speak same language if you know how to listen. Your daughter, she listens, she trusts. That is rare gift. Running Bear's eyes found Sarah's. You save Running Bear twice now, first from bullets, now from snake that would bite while Running Bear too weak to defend. This is debt that cannot be repaid with horses or gold. I don't want horses or gold, Sarah said simply. I just want you to get better. As the morning sun climbed higher, painting the canyon walls in shades of orange and gold, the three of them settled into an exhausted rest. Thomas kept watch while Sarah curled up beside Running Bear, her small hand resting near his, offering comfort without words. 3 days passed in that hidden canyon, 3 days that existed outside the normal flow of time. Running Bear's fever finally broke on the second night, and by the third morning he could sit up without assistance, though his wounds still pained him greatly. Thomas made trips back to the ranch each night, returning before dawn with supplies, food, water, more bandages. He told the ranch hands that Sarah had taken ill with fever and needed quiet, which explained why no one could visit. The lie sat heavy on his conscience, but the alternative was unthinkable. Sarah spent her days tending to Running Bear, and in those quiet hours he taught her things her schoolbooks never could. He showed her how to read the clouds, how to find water by watching where birds flew at dawn, how to move through the canyon without disturbing the natural silence. In return, she told him stories about her mother, about the ranch, about her dreams of one day becoming a teacher. You will be good teacher, Running Bear said on the third day, watching her practice writing Apache words in the sand. You have patience, you have open heart. These things more important than books. Will you teach me more? Sarah asked. About your people, your traditions. Running Bear smiled, though sadness flickered in his eyes. If Running Bear lived long enough, yes, but first must return to people. They think chief dead. Without leader, young warriors make foolish choices, start fights that cannot be won. That afternoon, as the sun began its descent, they heard horses. Thomas, who had been gathering firewood nearby, dropped the branches and rushed back to the spring. Riders, he said tersely, at least 4 of them coming from the south. Running Bear tried to stand, but his legs weren't ready. He gripped the tree trunk for support, his jaw set with determination. The men who shoot Running Bear. They come back. Stay down, Thomas ordered, already checking his revolver. Sarah, get behind that boulder. No, Sarah said, surprising both men. There's another way. She ran to her satchel and pulled out the stone talisman Running Bear had given her that first night. You said, if I showed this to Apache, they would know I was your friend. What if those riders aren't the outlaws? What if they're your people? Running Bear's eyes widened. Possible. My scouts search this area, but also possible they are white men who kill Running Bear if they find. There's only one way to know, Sarah said, and before either man could stop her, she climbed up onto the highest rock, making herself visible to whoever was approaching. Sarah, get down, Thomas hissed, but she ignored him. The riders came into view around the bend, 4 Apache warriors on painted horses, their faces marked with traditional hunting paint. When they saw Sarah standing on the rock, they immediately reached for their weapons. Sarah held up the stone talisman, her arms stretched high above her head, so the sun caught its polished surface. I am friend of Running Bear, and of, she shouted in the broken Apache Running Bear had taught her. Running Bear lives, he is here. The lead warrior held up his hand, stopping the others from notching arrows. He urged his horse forward slowly, his eyes never leaving the stone in Sarah's hand. When he was close enough, Sarah could see the resemblance, the same high cheekbones, the same proud bearing. This had to be family. I am Swift Eagle, the warrior said in accented English, his voice cautious. That stone belonged to Running Bear. How you have it? Running Bear gave it to me, Sarah answered, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. He is wounded, but alive. I found him 3 days ago, shot by outlaws. My father and I have been caring for him. Swift Eagle's hand moved to his bow, his eyes narrowing. White men care for Apache chief? This is trick. No trick, Running Bear's voice called out, and he emerged from behind the cottonwoods, leaning heavily on Thomas for support. This child saved Running Bear's life. And this man, he gestured to Thomas, he remove bullets, clean wounds, give medicine. They risk everything to help enemy. This is truth. The 4 warriors dismounted quickly, rushing to their chief. Swift Eagle's face transformed from suspicion to joy as he embraced Running Bear carefully, mindful of his wounds. We thought you dead, Swift Eagle said, his voice thick with emotion. The outlaws, they told everyone they killed Great Running Bear. Some of our young warriors want revenge, want to attack settlements. No, Running Bear said firmly, no more attacks. This child, he gestured to Sarah, she show Running Bear that not all white people are same. Some have hearts that see beyond skin color. Some have courage that puts warriors to shame. Swift Eagle looked at Sarah with new eyes, then at Thomas. This is strange thing. But Running Bear speak truth, so Swift Eagle believe. Over the next hour, as the afternoon sun painted long shadows across the canyon, Running Bear explained everything to his warriors. He told them about Sarah finding him, about her dragging him to safety, about the rattlesnake, about Thomas's skilled hands saving his life. The warriors listened in silence, their expressions shifting from disbelief to respect. When it came time for Running Bear to leave, Sarah felt her eyes burning with unshed tears. She had known this moment would come, but knowing didn't make it easier. Running Bear knelt before her, ignoring the pain in his wounds. He placed both hands on her small shoulders. Sarah Mitchell, he said solemnly, you give Running Bear something precious. Not just life, but hope. Hope that maybe one day our peoples can live without fear, without hate. Will I see you again? Sarah asked, her voice wavering. Running Bear smiled, a genuine warmth lighting his weathered face. Desert is big, but hearts that touch like ours, they stay connected. When you see hawk flying over canyon, know that Running Bear thinks of brave little girl who saved his life. He removed a small leather pouch from his belt and pressed it into her hands. Medicine herbs. For your father's ranch, for people who need healing. You are healer, Sarah. Not just of body, but of hearts. Never forget this. Thomas stepped forward and extended his hand to Running Bear. The Apache chief looked at it for a moment, then clasped it firmly. You good father, Running Bear said. You raised daughter with wisdom of the heart. Thank you for showing me there's another way, Thomas replied quietly. My wife would have been proud of what happened here. As Running Bear mounted one of the horses, supported by his warriors, he looked back one final time at the little girl standing beside her father in that hidden canyon. One more thing, he called out. If ever you find young woman 20 summers with eyes like morning sky and laugh like birdsong, if you find my morning sky, tell her Running Bear never stop looking, never stop loving. I will, Sarah promised. I'll never stop looking either. Years later, when Sarah Mitchell became a teacher in a small schoolhouse that served both settler and Apache children, she would tell her students about the summer she saved a great chief's life. She would show them the stone talisman and the pouch of healing herbs, now carefully preserved. And she would teach them the most important lesson she ever learned, that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about choosing compassion even when you're terrified. It's about seeing the person beneath the skin, the heart beneath the history, the possibility beneath the prejudice. Some bridges, she would say, are built with stones and wood. But the strongest bridges, the ones that truly connect worlds, are built with small acts of kindness, with hands that reach across divides, with hearts brave enough to believe in a different tomorrow. If this story touched your heart, tell me in the comments. What moment moved you most? And if you made it all the way here, write the words, "Bridges of Compassion," so I know you believe, like Sarah did, that a single act of kindness can change everything. Don't forget to check the other powerful stories waiting for you in the cards. Stories about courage, about love that defends the impossible, about people who dared to see beyond what the world told them to see. Because sometimes the greatest warriors aren't the ones who fight. They're the ones who choose to heal.